This week's parasha, Parashat Shelach, the end of the parasha, we have the mitzvah of Tzitzit. So I saw a cool idea, a cool perspective on what the mitzvah of Tzitzit is all about from Rav Gershon Leiner, the Radziner Rebbe, in his Sefer Sod Yesharim ala Torah. We've actually quoted the Radziner Rebbe from some of his other svarim. We've quoted his grandfather, the Mea Shiloach as well. They were big into Tzitzit. He actually, Rav Leiner, the Radziner, he actually was the first one to begin to try to bring back the Techelet in today's time, over about 120 years ago. He thought that he discovered what the Techelet was, and he already started to dye his tzitzit with a certain dye that he claims to be the real one, the authentic Techelet. Some of the Breslovers still today use that Techelet as well. But in his Sefer Sod Yesharim, he speaks in general more about what are the deeper lessons we can learn from the tzitzit, looking at the strings, what's really going on over there. So he begins by discussing that there are two ways to relate to Hashem. This is also an idea that we've spoken about in the past, but now I want to look at it from a fresh angle based on what he writes in Sod Yesharim. So he says, the first derech of how to relate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he calls the derech of the igulim. Igul is a circle, it's the derech of the circles. An igul, a circle, is symbolized by everything being equidistant from the middle. The middle spiritually corresponds to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it corresponds to Hashem, as the Gemara tells us in Ta'anit at the end of days, where the Jewish people all the tzaddikim are going to stand surrounding with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the middle. So the idea of the circle is that everybody's equidistant, no matter who you are, the whole population, the whole world is equidistant to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with Hashem being in the center. But there's another derech to approach the world, and that's the derech of the ribua. It's the square, and the square is made up of kavim, it's made up of lines, and the lines meet up at the four corners. It says the Yerushalmi in Ma'asrot, Perkei, Mishnah Gimel. Tani Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, says Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Ein merubah mishesh yemei bereshit. He says, when Hashem created the world, there was no merubah, there were no straight lines, there were no corners, there was no squares. Ein merubah, there were no squares from the creation of the world, meaning when a Kadosh Baruch Hu creates, he only creates in the shape of igulim. He only creates in the shape of curvy things, of circle things. There's no perfect lines, there's no perfect corners. That is all man-made. Think about it, think of the actual physical world out there, think about creation. Creation is not made in squares. Says Rav Leiner, the square also symbolizes the corners, where the corners are the furthest part from the center. Meaning, when you have yourself a square, you have yourself the side. The middle of the side is close to the center, but the other points on the line on the side, some are closer, some are more distant. Until you get to the corner is the most far away. It's the furthest away from the center of the square. So, meaning the parts that make up the square are not equidistant from the center. So he says, thus, in our man-made world, where we build the squares, we build the corners, we make the lines, there are times when we feel closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and there's times when we feel like we've walked so far away from God, so far away from the center, we feel like we're in that corner, we feel like we're far from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He says that it's at these times, at these moments, when we leave the understanding of the circle, when we don't necessarily see that we really are close to Hashem, because for a certain angle, we're always in a circle. Even when we mess up, even when we're far away, even when we're close, we're always in this circle, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu really is Melok Haaretz Kevado. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everything, and even when we mess up, that's part of the free will that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us, meaning there are times when, but we don't see that way. We don't necessarily live in this perception of the circle. Oftentimes we live in the perception of the square, and there are times when we feel like we've moved away from the center. There are times when we feel we moved away from God. And he says that's where the mitzvah of tzitzit takes place. Because what's the tzitzit? We take ourselves a four-cornered garment, we take ourselves a square, and we add strings to the corners, meaning the furthest parts away from the center, we put on a string, we put on that Techelet, we put on those tzitziot to remind ourselves that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is really the center of everything. Even when we feel distant from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we look at the string in the corners, and that string takes us back to the ocean, to the Shamayim, to the Kisei HaKavod. When we're sitting there in that corner, it's going to bring us all the way back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when we look at that tzitzit. And he says this might explain the sin of the Mekoshesh. The Mekoshesh, it seems, the one who broke Shabbat, it says that the Mekoshesh, according to many in Chazal, from the Gemara, it might have been Slofchad who was doing it the Shem Shamayim, and he was doing it for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He felt that he had to basically do like some kind of a suicide mission to teach the Jewish people that they have to keep Shabbat. So it was a kind of the Shem Shamayim sin. So he said, the Mekoshesh, says the Radziner Rebbe, the Mekoshesh made the mistake of acting like he's living in the circle model when he was really living in the square model. While there are these two perspectives taking place at the exact same time, but really Hashem is everywhere, Hashem really is always close to us, but we don't always necessarily live that way in the square world that we build. So what was his mistake? He said, oh, I'm connected to the center. God's always here. So therefore, if I sin L'Shem Shamayim, the rules no longer apply anymore. If all Avodah is equal, the good, the bad, if I do a sin L'Shem Shamayim to save the Jewish people, that should be good enough. Even breaking Shabbat L'Shem Shamayim, that should be kosher as long as I recognize why I'm doing it. I'm doing it for God. I'm connecting to God, and I'm making the Jewish people a better people this way. So as long as my kavanah is correct, I can even do sins, because what do actions matter anymore? Aren't actions only just the means to get close to God? But says the Radziner Rebbe, that's incorrect. That's incorrect. While that might be a certain perspective from the perspective of the circle, but from the perspective of the square, which is the physical world that we live in down below, that's not how we relate to God. There is a hierarchy, there are rules, there are lines. It's not everything being equal. Not every action we do is considered the same. There are things we're allowed to do, things we're not allowed to do. And just to say something that I'm not allowed to do, if I just do it L'Shem Shamayim, now I'm allowed to do it, he says the world doesn't work that way. This also might be an understanding of the midrash that we mentioned in our other Dvar Torah from the Tana Devei Eliyahu. We said in the other recording that part of the mistake of the Mekoshesh was that he forgot Hashem because he wasn't wearing tefillin. But what's the tikkun? The tikkun was we have the mitzvah after him. Then the very next section after Mekoshesh is at the end of our parsha is Tzitzit, because the Tzitzit is the tikkun. That's going to be the fix it to always remember that the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So he says that Radziner, based on our circle-based ideology, the Mekoshesh needed the mitzvah of Tzitzit. He needed the square of the Tzitzit on the corner to remember that there is a path, a proper path in life. There is a world of lines. There is a way to connect to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. The world of finite that we live in is not the world of the infinite of the circle, and therefore you have to follow the rules. You can't just break Shabbat L'Shem Shamayim. There's a path to get to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and that path is more in the symbol of a line, and not just I can do whatever I want. And says the Radziner Rebbe, these mistakes take place when we see the world only as a circle. And he actually writes, fascinatingly enough, the circle is really God's perspective on life. Meaning when God created the world, as we saw in that Gemara and the Yerushalmi, that God created the world, there weren't any squares, but we created squares. So meaning Hashem creates circles, that's his perspective. But our perspective is the line. Our perspective is the square. I was thinking, when you start thinking about creation, are there any lines? Are there any squares? So I was thinking, what about the horizon? When you look out at the ocean and where the heaven meets the ocean, that kind of looks like a line. There kind of is like a kav over there. It's not a square, but it is a line. It's a kav. So I was thinking, the Gemara there tries to ask, but there's this kind of seed and this kind of vegetable kind of looks like it's squared, and the Gemara is able to push off those opinions. So, but I was thinking, the Gemara doesn't ask about the horizon, but the truth of the matter is, the horizon isn't real. It's really more of an optical illusion. When we go up to the ocean, what happens? The horizon keeps moving and moving and moving. It's this spot that we see in the distance of where the water meets the sky. It's not a real line. But this illusion, I think, is that's actually maybe gufa. That is the secret of the Techelet string. Because what's the Techelet string supposed to remind ourselves? To get from the water up to the sky, up to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, we have this line to get back to God. But if you actually go up to the water and you take the water out in a cup, it's not blue anymore. And if you actually walk up to that horizon, it keeps moving away from you. So it's really not there. But at the same time, that is the imagination of the Techelet. That is the imagination of the line in nature to get us back to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Says the Radziner, we're going to read it a little bit inside right now. He quotes from the Gemara in Menachot, Daf Mem Aleph Amud Bet. Ein tzitzit ela yotze, ein tzitzit ela anav. So he says that, what is the language of tzitzit? The language of tzitzit is a tzitzit that it comes out, it's like the fringes that come out of the corner of the side. So he says, Shemitzad Hashem Yitbarach, kol habriya b'bchinat igul. He says from the perspective of God, all of creation is in this bechina, this aspect of circles. Kedita b'Yerushalmi ma'asot, as we said in this Gemara in Yerushalmi, late ribua b'shesh yemei bereshit. There were no squares from the creation of the world. V'ribua hu rak mitzad habriya, says the Radziner Rebbe. The concept of squares is only from the perspective of the creation. V'lechen tziva Kadosh Baruch Hu mitzvah tzitzit. That's why Hashem commanded us to do the mitzvah tzitzit. Shebesha'a sheyotzeh ma'igul, because when you get out, tzitzit is this language of yotzeh, of going out. The fringes that come out of the corners that we saw in the Gemara. So from the moment that you're yotzeh from the igul, when you leave the circle, you score shasham gam ken Hashem yitbarach mashkiach. You realize that God is there as well. When we, in our physical world down below, we go out to work, we go out to the 6 days, we get out there, we're trying to make a difference out there in the world, we're moving, and at times, when we get out there in that physical world, we feel like we're so far from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So now the tzitzit comes in that corner. We left the circle, we went to the square. Now we have to remember that Hashem is mashkiach on us. He watches over us. Metzitz min hacharakim. He's looking over to us. Another language of tzitzit. He's watching over us even when we go out to those corners. Umimele, says the back to Radziner, Umimele tishmor mitzvah hazot et adam the bilti itpashet biyoter b'makom she'eno yachol lashuv lemekoro. And this mitzvah is going to help us that we're not going to expand out to a place that we can't return to God. If we have this tzitzit with the string on the corner, it's going to remind ourselves, even when we're going off to the most physical parts of the world, we're getting into the most nitty gritty of the tachtonim of this world down below, and we're a place where we think we can't find God. We remember the tzitzit in the corner. Hashem is there as well, and now we're not going to disappear. And this is what he says, that the mitzvah tzitzit is a protection for the Shabbat. בפרשת שלח, שלכוונה זו רבה ורב יוסף היו מבקעים עצים לכבוד שבת והיו נזהרים בציצית. This is beautifully. He says this explains why tzitzit protects us from Shabbat. Here I believe he's hinting to our Tana de Veliyahu that we mentioned, that we need tzitzit on Shabbat for some kind of extra protection. And that's why he says there's the story of Rabbah and Rav Yosef, that they used to do two different things. They would be mevakim etzim lichvot Shabbat. They would chop the wood before Shabbat, and they were also very careful when it came to the mitzvah of tzitzit. So this is beautiful because we're saying the makoshesh etzim, the one who sinned with the trees on Shabbat. So there's some kind of I was trying to see if I can find any mystical source. I didn't have enough time to see if there's any kind of connection mystically between these rabbis and the Mekoshesh. But if we go to the Gemara in Shabbat of Kuf Yud Chet Amud Bet, Amar le Rav Yosef Brei de Rabbah. There's a story of Rav Yosef speaking to Rav Yosef, the son of Rabbah. He says, Avuch, your father, b'mai zehir tefei. What was he so careful with? Amarle betzitzit. He was so careful when it came to mitzvah of tzitzit. Yom echad hava kasarik bedarga. One day he was walking on a ladder. Ifsik lechuta, and one of the strings of the tzitzit ripped. Velo nachit ve'ata kema de la ramya, and he would not go down this ladder. He would not move until they put a brand new string on there, until they fixed the tzitzit. So we see over here how Rabbah was so makpid when it came to tzitzit. And then we have, on Kuf Yud Tet Amud Aleph, just right next page, Rabbah Rav Yosef, Metzalche Tzevi, that it speaks over there, a list of all the rabbis. What would they do to prepare for Shabbat? Because all the rabbis were so careful. They wanted to always do something themselves. They didn't just rely on their workers and on their family. They themselves wanted to get involved. So in the case of Rabbah and Rav Yosef, they would chop the wood. So if we have this concept of the Mekoshesh Eitzim, breaking Shabbat with the wood, breaking off the branch, whatever kind of cutting of wood it sounds like he was doing. So Rabbah and Rav Yosef are doing the wood before Shabbat. And then Rabbah is being so careful when it comes to the mitzvah of tzitzit, as his son Rav Yosef is telling the other Rav Yosef. So we see over here this concept of tzitzit and Shabbat coming together, because we don't want to forget the Shabbat. We don't want to make the mistake of the Mekoshesh Eitzim, and tzitzit happens to be an extra koach for the Shabbat. So I was thinking, okay, Lanu dati, Shabbat in a certain sense, I think, relates more to this concept of an igul. On Shabbat, everybody's close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The hierarchies that take place in our society and all this kind of, it doesn't exist anymore. We all come before HaKadosh Baruch Hu like Bnei Melachim. We sit in our Shabbat tables with our family, and we all really do feel this level of being equidistant to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We do really feel like, I think part of when we try to save the world, that already starts to create divisions. Who's going to be the Kohen? Who's going to be the Levi? We're already hinting now to next week's parasha of Korach. You have to have leadership. But on Shabbat, when we take a step back and we just say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one that runs the world. So in a certain sense, that's the role of the Igul. We're looking at it more from God's perspective right now, where, it's not us anymore. And in that sense, all of us, even those that every single one of us is such an important piece, such an important neshama that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought into this world to bring the world to its fruition. So we're all equidistant to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the problem is, you can take this idea a little bit too far, and that's when you have the issue of the Mekoshesh, where the Mekoshesh felt he could even break Shabbat for the sake of some kind of greater good of God, because that's how close he was to God. I could even mess things up. If the kavanah is the right kind of way, that would be too far. So therefore, the Midrash is saying we have to have ourselves square as well. So I actually saw the Radziner. He quotes the intro to the Zohar, to the very beginning in Bereshit, the very beginning, the intro part. He says that the Zohar says that Shabbat is actually seen as a square within a circle. So that's also interesting. So we don't really understand these Zohars, but it seems to be that Shabbat is having these double kohot to them, and then I tried, but it really wasn't able to really grasp what the commentators were saying, if it's a square within a circle within a square, and the weekdays versus Shabbat, but it seems to be we have a certain level of this double kohot, and the Radziner then says that the concept of chilul Shabbat, what does chilul mean? To break Shabbat, to desecrate the Shabbat. So he says chilul chilul is the same language as a halal, as an empty space. So he says that's where the mistakes happen. The mistake happens in the halal. The chilul Shabbat would happen in the halal. It's the empty space in the circle and in the square. It's how you relate to the center in those mekomot, in that spot, in our relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's kind of where the issues take place. Now, the Radziner Rebbe writes beautifully that he says, we know that the first commandment of the 10 commandments is Anochi Hashem, that I am the Lord your God. Now, he said it's written B'lashon Hoveh. It's written as like a constant, as like a now, but it's not written B'lashon Tzivui. It's not written as a commandment. You must believe there is a God. You have to. It's not written in that kind of a language. To the point we've even mentioned in the past, there's some Rishonim that don't even learn it as a commandment. And maybe the next commandments will only start with the next one, break it up into two. But this concept of Anochi Hashem, he learns as the first commandment, but it's written in Lashon Hoveh, because Anochi Hashem, this understanding that God is at the center of our lives, that God is really everything, it's a constant. It's not a commandment. It's not, oh, you have to recognize there's a God. It's that, no, there is a God. That is the constant reality of the world that's greater than us and ourselves and our understanding itself. That all of existence, it all comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, everything in this life is just a way to get closer or further away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, all of the mitzvot, they're just extensions of these opportunities so we can get ourselves facing the center, facing the Anochi Hashem and recognizing this Anochi Hashem. This also explains, he says, why we wear tzitzit during the day, and when we go out there, he says, in the daytime we go out there to work, we're out there in the street, we're leaving the Beit Knesset, we're leaving the Beit Midrash, we're leaving our homes and the kedusha of our homes, and instead we're going out there into the world. And in those kind of areas, we might seem so far from Hashem, I'm busy doing my nitty gritty in my workplace, and Hashem's not here. Hashem's not part of this gashmius, this tachtonim world that I lived in over here. But no, dafka over there, where I'm making my own choices, where I'm doing my own things, Hashem says, oh, no. Hashem is there too. And Hashem's hashkacha, Hashem is mitzitz min hacharakim, Hashem is there also. He gives other examples of other mitzvot that, like when we're dealing with like food type stuff, that all of a sudden, and all the mitzvot where you think kochi ve'otzam yadi, where you're thinking that it's really all of my heavy work that I'm putting into things, bringing out those vegetables, those fruits, all the steps along the way, we're always giving a portion to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to recognize that Hashem is there also. So he says, therefore, when we're going out into the world, that's the daytime. He says, when we go to sleep, what's taking place? We're falling asleep. Our neshama is going up to the shamayim. We're basically being mevatel ourselves. We're nullifying ourselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Our souls are going up for the night. So in those kind of cases, we won't need the tzitzit. So that's why I think now it's interesting that then now we have a dichotomy, because in the first place, during the week we would need it, because that's when we're going out to the corners of the square. So now I think lanutati, what's coming out of this Radziner, based on the Midrash and Tanchum and the Mekoshesh, the Chidush of Tzitzit on Shabbat, is maybe we would have thought that on Shabbat I'm not really going out there to the corners. On Shabbat I'm really embracing the circle, and that might be why I don't need the Tzitzit there. But then we see that no, there is a danger, because if you only focus on the circle too much, you might forget completely there's a Tzitzit, and that's going to lead you to do things that are keneged halacha, antinomian things like the Mekoshesh Eitzim was trying to do with the right l'shem shamayim, circle kavanot, but not actually following the halacha properly. So based on this, what we're saying is that the tzitzit of the weekday, the 6 days of the week, that's really because we're going out there into the corners, but we're trying to recognize that even in those corners, even when we think we're so far away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Melo Kol Haaretz Kevodo, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there as well, and we recognize at that corner that our shorish is in the center, that we really connect back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And now we know when it comes to Kedusha, when it comes to holiness to God, what is distance when it comes to God? There's no physical distance. The concept of Rachok and Karov when it comes to Hashem is the concept of how close we are, how much we recognize God, how much God is part of our reality. So that's why the idea is when I'm physically in a place that seems to be an area that's so far from God, if I can bring Hashem in there, if I could add that one string, add the Techelet, add the Tzitzit, add those 8 strings to the corner, that's going to bring me back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and at that point I'm close again. At that point I'm bringing myself back into this concept of a circle. But really, that we need this dafka when we're in the square. He says this also explains why the halacha is that we don't do a tzitzit by a circle garment, because a circle garment, everything is equal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It recognizes God, so it's kind of like on the nighttime we go up to the shamayim, we're with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We don't need a piece simple halacha tzitzit at night. And then so too when it comes to a circle garment as well, that already is the aspect of the circle. And he says with this we could also explain. We explain now how the Mekoshesh is the story right before. Here we said the Mekoshesh is making the mistake of being too much into the concept of living in the circle, that he thinks he can break the halacha because there is no square, there are no rules, there is no hierarchy. Says the Radziner This might also be part of the mistake when it comes to Korach in next week's parasha. Korach also rejects the tzitzit. He asks questions. I don't understand if the square itself is Techelet, do I need a string in that corner? But they say that he really felt kulam kedushim. He felt that everybody was holy. He really also, similar to the Mekoshesh, was living on a level of circles. He was living on the level where we're all equal to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. I was trying to say we don't have a world of squares and lines. If we don't have a world of squares and lines, we don't need Kohanim, we don't need Levi'im, we don't need Israel, we don't have to have different jobs. We say no, there is a Kohen right now in this world. He's going to lift up his hands vertically. We have a line. When he wants to bless us, the hands go up. There is a Shamayim and there is an Aretz. There is a separation. There is a tachtonim, there is a lower part to these worlds, and we want to try to bring the kedusha, and that's the idea. We're putting the tzitzit dafka on the corner. It says kasha. Oh, what if the whole tzitzit is techelet? Do I need to have it on a corner? Yeah, no, you got to dafka at the corner because that's the avodah of the tzitzit. So therefore, the lesson of the tzitzit in this world is complex. It's teaching us there is a hierarchy out there. There are rules out there. There are times when we're going to feel further away. There are times we're going to feel closer to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. But the idea is ultimately the tzitzit is supposed to open up our eyes to try to bring ourselves back into the center, try to bring ourselves back into the understanding that a Kadosh Baruch Hu is here, and from Hashem's perspective, this is an equidistant circle to God, but at the same time, we're still going to wear it even on Shabbat, because on Shabbat, we have the other fear. We might think that we're too much into the circle, that there is no hierarchy, there is no laws, and Hashem really is everywhere, so I can really basically do whatever I want with that kavanah, and the idea is no, that's not the world we live in at all, and maybe this could be somewhat of a kavanah. The idea is that we have ourselves a square inside a circle, as the Kabbalah says, and we have to be able to live on these both levels of reality at the exact same time. Shabbat Shalom.